Recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment that I think is going to be loved by both sides of the room here today since it makes so much sense. The situation we have is it will fix an issue that under the FAA regulations, which currently prevents a privately owned restricted category aircraft, which is already performing a wildfire suppression operation, from transporting firefighters to a scene. Now, if this exact same aircraft would be owned by a public entity, such as a Forest Service, BLM, etc., that aircraft would be allowed to transport firefighters while performing a wildfire suppression operation. Even more so, the fact if this government agency were to decide to lease this private aircraft for 90 days or more, that would magically transform it into the type of aircraft that would be allowed to transport firefighters on the way to a suppression action. But under the current guidelines, they're not allowed to do so. So this would either force contractors to have to get 90 days or longer leases with entities that may not want the aircraft for 90 days or be able to afford that. This might be a small local entity, local government. So what we're doing is allowing some flexibility here to not be locked into 90-day aircraft contracts that aren't needed, and at the same time prevent unneeded ferrying back and forth, one for fire suppression activities and then another one to transport the personnel when it would be perfectly logical to transport them on the same trip, saving fuel, saving wear and tear on the aircraft and the people, and even a little extra unneeded pollution in the air from running the aircraft, right? So my amendment requires FAA to move forward with allowing the private aircraft to also transport firefighters when they are fighting wildfires. The current policy is an unnecessary barrier to being able to deploy and fully utilize the capabilities of existing wildfire contractors for wildfire suppression. Mr. Chairman, I reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I oppose the amendment which directs the FAA to issue an interim final rule to allow restricted category aircraft to be used to transport firefighters to and from wildfire sites and other conforming changes. While I support the intent of helping firefighters, this amendment is not the way to do it. In fact, if we're talking about firefighters, a firefighter lost his life in Memphis today fighting a fire, and several were injured, and we hope they'll recover quickly. It's a difficult profession. Restricted category aircraft are certified by the FAA for only very specific types of missions. Many of them are aircraft specifically built for military operations. This amendment would create a shortcut for manufacturers interested in selling aircrafts. However, the aircraft are not certified to the safety standards needed to carry passengers. This is an attempt by one manufacturer to create a domestic market for its aircraft without going through the FAA safety certification process. That's just not cricket. Furthermore, interim final rules are only issued in situations where a regulatory process or requirement is clearly and directly creating a safety or security hazard. There are multiple paths for this aircraft to be put into good use, helping firefighters, and manufacturers should follow that process. Congress should not be writing safety loopholes for companies to sell aircraft that potentially put our nation's firefighters at risk. I stand with our firefighters, and I continue to reserve my time and oppose the amendment.
The gentleman from Tennessee reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really wounded by that because the logic just isn't there. What we're talking about is an aircraft that is fully certified, that if it was under a 90-day or longer contract, everybody would be hunky-dory with it. It'd be perfectly kosher. But in this situation here, since it doesn't have that long of a contract, it's not now considered a public aircraft. So it meets all the standards for safety, for transporting personnel, as well as transporting the products with which we'll be putting out the fire. So I am just mystified as to the logic why we can't do this. It'll save sorties, it'll save a lot of unneeded pain, and it'll also allow local entities to be able to afford to keep these aircraft around because they're not going to be locked into 90-day contracts. So I'm just lost as why this couldn't be agreed to by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, sir. Let me put my colleagues' mind at rest. I don't intend to call for a roll call. I will oppose the amendment, but I will not intend to call for a roll call. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Tennessee yields. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I appreciate that. My colleague from Tennessee there, you mentioned a while ago with Mr. Issa 40 loves, so I'll pick up on the love part of that and say that this is a friendlier discussion. So I thank you for that. I will, with that, I will yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from California yields.